The rain hammered against the windows of Marcus Chen's small apartment in downtown Seattle as he prepared his usual evening meal of instant ramen. The 32-year-old software engineer had grown accustomed to the solitary rhythm of his life. Work, home, sleep, repeat. But tonight would shatter that routine forever. A brilliant flash of blue light erupted in the alley behind his building, followed by a thunderous crash that rattled his dishes. Marcus peered through his kitchen window and saw something impossible. A crystalline pod, smoking and cracked, embedded in the concrete below. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and rushed downstairs. As he approached the wreckage, the pod's surface began to fracture with musical chimes. From within emerged a figure that defied every law of biology he understood. She was humanoid but ethereal, standing nearly 7 feet tall with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, and her eyes, those ancient luminous eyes, held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. But what struck Marcus most was not her otherworldly beauty. It was the tears streaming down her face and the way she trembled with what could only be described as terror. The being collapsed to her knees, speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Though Marcus couldn't understand her words, the universal language of distress needed no translation. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, approaching with his hands raised peacefully. "You're hurt." She looked up at him, and in that moment something extraordinary happened. Her melodic voice shifted, adapting to his language with remarkable speed. "Please," she whispered, her accent carrying the music of distant stars. "They cannot find me here." Marcus glanced around the empty alley, then back at this impossible visitor. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was a hallucination, but the blood, if that silver fluid could be called blood, seeping from cuts on her arms was very real. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "Let's get you inside." For the next 3 days, the being, who introduced herself as Princess Lyrale of the Andorian Empire, recovered in Marcus's spare bedroom. She told him fragments of her story between long periods of rest. A civil war that had torn her civilization apart, betrayal by those she trusted, and a desperate escape that had brought her to Earth. Marcus asked no questions about galactic politics or the technology that had delivered her to his doorstep. Instead, he simply cared for her as he would any injured person. He brought her food, though she subsisted mainly on the sugar water he prepared. He gave her clean clothes, his largest t-shirts that still barely fit her tall frame. Most importantly, he gave her something her own people had failed to provide: unconditional kindness. On the 4th morning, they came. Marcus was making coffee when the sky above Seattle erupted in light. Massive ships, each the size of a city block, materialized through what appeared to be tears in space itself. Their hulls gleamed like polished obsidian, and their very presence seemed to bend the morning sun's rays into impossible colors. Lyrale gasped from the living room window. "The Imperial fleet," she whispered. "They found me." Within minutes, armored figures began materializing on Marcus's fire escape. Each stood 8 feet tall, encased in technology that hummed with barely contained power. Their leader, distinguished by golden trim on his armor, stepped through the window as if the glass were merely an illusion. "Princess Lyrale," the figure intoned, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "By order of Emperor Vaktar, you will return to face judgment for your crimes against the state." "What crimes?" Marcus found himself stepping between them, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was acutely aware that he was just a human facing beings who could travel between stars. But something deeper than fear drove him forward. "She's hurt. She's scared. What kind of people hunt down someone who's clearly suffering?" The armored leader tilted his head as if Marcus were an interesting insect. "Human, you do not comprehend the forces at play here. Stand aside." "No." That single word seemed to freeze the entire room. Lyrale's eyes widened in shock, while the soldiers shifted with what might have been uncertainty. "You would defy the Andorian Empire for a stranger?" the leader asked. Marcus felt the absurdity of the situation. A software engineer from Seattle facing down an interstellar military force. But as he looked back at Lyrale, remembering her tears that first night and the gradual return of light to her eyes over the past few days, he found his answer. "She's not a stranger anymore. And I don't care what empire you represent. You don't take scared people from their sanctuary. Not while I'm breathing." The leader raised his weapon, a device that crackled with energy that made the air itself recoil. But before he could act, Lyrelei stepped forward. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying a new strength. "Commander Zexhai, this human has shown me something I had forgotten existed in the universe. Compassion without agenda, protection without expectation of reward. In 3 days he has embodied more honor than our empire has shown in 3 centuries of conquest." She moved to Marcus's side, placing her hand on his shoulder. "I am Princess Lyrelei, heir to the Andorian throne, and I claim this human as my protector and champion. Any who would harm him must first face me." The transformation in the room was immediate. The soldiers, who had seemed as immovable as mountains, suddenly straightened to rigid attention. Commander Zexhai slowly lowered his weapon and, to Marcus's amazement, dropped to one knee. "Your Highness," he said, his voice now filled with reverence rather than command. "We came to retrieve you from kidnappers and rebels. We did not realize you were under the protection of—" He paused, studying Marcus with new eyes. "An honorable guardian." Within hours, the story had spread across the Andorian fleet, then throughout their empire. The tale of the human who had faced down an imperial task force to protect their princess became legend. But more than that, it became a catalyst for change. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the crystal halls of the Andorian capital, wearing ceremonial robes that felt absurdly grand on his ordinary frame. Princess Lyrelei, now empress after her father's peaceful abdication, had invited him to witness the signing of the first Galactic Compassion Accords, a treaty that would reshape how the great powers of the galaxy treated refugees and the displaced. "You changed everything," she told him as they watched representatives from dozens of worlds commit to principles of sanctuary and protection. Marcus shook his head, smiling. "I just did what anyone should do, what anyone would do." "That," Lyrelei replied, "is exactly why you changed everything." As Earth became the first world to receive full membership in the Galactic Council, not for its military might or technological prowess, but for the simple humanity one man had shown to a crying stranger in an alley, Marcus Chen continued to live in his small apartment in Seattle. He still made instant ramen for dinner, but now sometimes he cooked for 2.